We're here on the beach where a giant shark has just eaten a girl swimmer. Well, Mr. Jaws, how was it?
Dynamite!
And what did she say when you grabbed her?
Please, mister, please.
I know sharks are stupid, but what did you think when you took that first bite?
How sweet it is.
Mr. Jaws, before you swim out to sea, have you anything else to say?
Why can't we be friends? Why can't we be friends?
With me now is the local sheriff. Sheriff Brody, the shark will be back for lunch. What do you intend to do? Just arriving is oceanographer Matt Hooper. Sir, if someone is attacked by a shark, what should they do?
Do the hustle!
We're going aboard the fishing boat of Captain Quint. Captain, will you be able to catch this giant shark? Thank you, Captain. Captain! When you catch one of these sharks, what do you feel like?
Like a rhinestone cowboy.
We've just sighted the shark again. He's coming straight for us. Captain Quint is shouting something at him.
Get your baby one of these nights.
Hey, Jaws! The captain says he's going to catch you. What do you think of that? Uh-oh, here he comes again. They've hit him. Mr. Jaws, why doesn't anything seem to hurt you?
Big boy, stand quiet. Big boy, stand quiet.
He's coming right onto the boat. Mr. Jaws, why are you grabbing my hand?
Wouldn't you give your hand to a friend?
No, wait! Mr. Jaws! That's not the way this record is supposed to end! Help! Help!
Doctor, my eyes have seen the years and the slow parade of fears.
welcome to the Friends of Dan Music Podcast. I'm Dan Miles. You've been listening to the music of Brass Transit, which is one of our past guest Don Breithaupt's many side projects. That was their 2014 version of Jackson Browne's 1972 hit, Doctor My Eyes. Before that, we heard Mr. Jaws from 1975 by Dickie Goodman, who was the creator of the so-called break-in genre of comedy, where you read a straight line, then use a clip from a popular song to deliver the punchline. On the last episode of the podcast, I spoke with Don about his Monkey House and Breithaupt Brothers songbook projects. Those topics were more than enough to fill an episode, so I decided to save his work as an author for this episode. In 1996, the Breithaupt Brothers published Precious and Few, pop music of the early 70s. Then in 2000, they published a sequel called Night Moves, pop music in the late 70s. We're going to discuss both books and also listen to some more Brass Transit tracks as we go along. So let's get them on the line and get this started. Joining me on the phone from Los Angeles is Don Breithaupt. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Dan. We just ballooned past the giant epic interview last time and had more to talk about, it seems.
We did. I know it's been about 3 weeks, but gosh, somehow it just seems like you never really left.
The magic of podcasting.
Wink, wink, wink at the audience. Well, before we get into the books, let's talk a little bit about Brass Transit. I know it's primarily a Chicago tribute band and probably the best one out there. I visited your site, and you guys sound exactly like them. But interestingly, when it came time to record, you decided not to cover any Chicago songs. So what was the thinking there?
Well, first of all, we put that band together because everybody's a huge Chicago fan. If you became a musician and you're about my age, the chances are really good that Chicago was one of your early favorite bands, and the 8 guys in that group are no exception. And the band was put together just because we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could be doing gigs, playing music that we really like in more of a show setting, rather than just kind of saying yes to whatever the next freelance thing is that comes up. So we put in the work and got the Chicago stuff sounding just note for note, and went around, and it took off pretty quickly and turned out to be relatively easy to book. And invariably after a show, people would be all buzzed from the nostalgia of hearing all the Chicago stuff, and they would be asking us, can we buy your CD? And we were kind of like, well, if you like what we did, all you have to do is go buy Chicago's Greatest Hits, or Chicago 2, or Chicago 5, or, whichever ones you liked. But after a while, that answer wasn't really satisfying people, and we felt like we were probably leaving a lot of venue sales on the table, too, because, we create a great feeling with the audience, and they're all filing out, and they want to chat and hang and take pictures, and wouldn't it be great if we could have something that represented the band on CD as well. So the concept, which we all kind of arrived at, was instead of re-recording the Chicago stuff note for note, why don't we imagine a bunch of other tunes from that era and what they would have sounded like if they had been Chicago songs. And so our only criterion was it had to be a song that didn't have horns on it originally.
Yeah.
And we just sort of narrowed it down, and everybody had their short list of tunes, and we narrowed it, and eventually we ended up with the tunes that made the record. And then my job as the arranger was to, put a horn chart and, kind of tailor the rhythm section to sound like Chicago and not like Rare Earth or Jackson Browne or Gino Vanelli or Todd Rundgren or whatever the original concept was, which was really fun. I mean, that's a much more exciting assignment than just let's duplicate the record.
And now that I think about it, that would be pointless to do a Chicago album that sounds just like Chicago, because people could buy the other one. Then if you try to do Chicago songs and not sound like Chicago, sort of undercuts the whole trip. So I guess you had to go a different direction, and this was a smart way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could have done a pretty convincing job of doing the Chicago stuff, but it just seemed like treading water, and this was a way to kind of take what we had gotten so good at doing and apply it to something else.
Yeah, and you're right. If there's people sitting right there, with money in their pocket, holding out their hand, for a CD, not a bad idea to have one to sell to them.
Yeah, exactly. And, the people's reactions to it have been just phenomenal so far. People are, writing to us saying, I can't believe these weren't Chicago songs to start. People are starting to forget the original and think of them as Chicago tunes. So that's mission accomplished.
Well, we heard Dr. My Eyes already, and we're going to hear some more tracks from Brass Transit as we go along here. And since they're all rooted in the era we're about to discuss, I think it'll be a nice sort of seamless blend. So let's talk about Precious and Few, pop music of the early 70s. My first question is, out of all the song titles from the 70s that you could have used as the title for the book, why did you pick that one?
Well, that was, again, speaking of short list, that was on, I think our publisher helped us narrow that down. Marion Litzy, who was our editor, she was with St. Martin's Press at the time, that she's now with Penguin, I think helped us pick a title. But the idea was to pick, instead of picking some stone rock classic by Led Zeppelin or something from that era, pick a just one-off, one-hit wonder, typical of the era, something, you could mention the band Climax and no one has heard anything they've done. Apologies to Climax if they're listening, but, in the only song of theirs that's a household thing is Precious and Few, and there was a lot of that going on in the early 70s because it was kind of after the Beatles had broken up and after that kind of the Motown machine had slowed down, and it was kind of open season for about 5 years there in the early 70s, and there were a lot of one-hit wonders.
That's a good way to put it, open season. You co-wrote the book with your brother Jeff. What was your process? Did you always write together, or did you alternate chapters, or technically, how did you get it written?
That's the first book we wrote, and we were pretty much in a room together crafting every sentence. And I got to say, I've never laughed so hard in my life. We just we had such a riot writing that book. A lot of it was done in the party room at his apartment in New York City. But the genesis of it was we're just complete music nerds, and one time we were chatting away about this record label or that, some arcane detail of 70s music, and Jeff's wife Shelley said, you guys should write a book about this stuff. And we kind of laughed and said, yeah, oh, you know what? We should write a book about this.
Why not?
Maybe we could, So we looked into what a book proposal entailed, and we put one together. And actually, HarperCollins optioned it first, but couldn't get a U.S. partner on it. In the meantime, we got a U.S. literary agent, and eventually St. Martin's came on and seemed interested in running with it, and they eventually published it, to our great surprise and delight, because it's kind of like, I don't know, if you were a stamp collector and someone said, hey, do you want to write a book on stamps?
Yeah.
You'd go, hell yeah.
Well, there's not a lot of people covering that time period, and a lot of people who would really be able to do it well. I've seen these documentaries where these people start talking about this music, and I can tell from looking at them that they're too young to have experienced it firsthand. So when I see like a 27-year-old expert on, Uriah Heep or something, I'm thinking, you learned this in a scholarly fashion, or you studied the albums. It's always different, if it was your era and your generation and you were physically there.
Absolutely. It's in your DNA at some level then, and it's almost impossible to separate the tunes in a clinical way from the way you first experienced them, in your mom's station wagon or at the roller skating rink, or
One of the most fun parts of music, is like, making that association with the song, and sort of, it's almost like, a snapshot in a photo album or something, reminds you of a period of time, or, it's a sort of shorthand for like seeing the movie Star Wars or something, which, might put you back in 77, but it's an investment of your time, whereas, just hearing the Star Wars theme, might have the same effect.
Yeah, well, I would contend that hearing the Star Wars theme hits you a lot deeper and a lot harder and a lot more authentically than just kind of chatting about when you saw the movie. There is something about music that just goes deep, and it's instant, and it can put you in a certain place in time with laser accuracy.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I appreciate how you guys weren't shy about interjecting your own opinions regarding what you personally considered to be good or bad. I mean, no one can be truly objective anyway, so you might as well embrace that subjectivity. And as we already just said, as with your music, you inject a lot of humor into your writing, which makes it, light and fun to read. Just reading the table of contents is pretty entertaining all by itself.
Right. Yeah, that's what we were hoping, actually, with the table of contents and the subheadings, that if somebody just opened the front of the book and just saw those couple of pages, they'd be hooked if they were the right audience. And we debated about how kind of historical we should be, and then, like you said, you realize everybody has a personal reaction to this stuff, so there's no point in behaving like you're doing your doctoral dissertation on it. I mean, just write what you feel, and if something's funny, point it out.
Yeah, and if something's awesome or something sucks, and everybody knows it's awesome, everyone knows it sucks, why pretend it doesn't?
Yes, exactly. It's the giving everything equal weight theory, which I never relate to.
Yeah. You don't want to hurt the feelings of the terrible songwriter, at the expense of, Page Plant. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, part of the reason we wrote the book was that, speaking of Page Plant, was that, there were a billion Led Zeppelin books and Beatle books and Motown books and Rolling Stone books and Hendrix books, but there was nothing that specifically addressed this little half a decade, let's say, where everything was up for grabs, and it seemed like every couple of months there'd be some new genre or, a new number one song by somebody you'd never heard of.
Yeah.
And gradually, things got nailed down more in the 5 years that followed that. You started to have kind of superstars again, Fleetwood Macs and the Eagles and that kind of thing. But in the early 70s, it was really, really pleasantly random.
Yeah, that's very true. And so you're more or less commencing with the breakup of the Beatles, because you indicated the time period you're covering is December 31st, 1970 through December 31st, 1975. And you mentioned the breakup of the Beatles and sort of taking it up to the dawn of disco. And, as far as why you covered the first half of the decade, well, you filled it in anyways with the next book we're going to talk about. So in a way it's good, because if you'd done the entire decade, this period of time we're talking about would have got maybe half the attention instead of all the attention.
Right, and we felt like that was the spot to zero in on, because, for one thing, it was our earliest memories of being into music, but also it was a chunk of time that hadn't had its musical story told properly before. Worth kind of rescuing it from obscurity, because so much great stuff started or came to fruition during those years.
Yeah, and you focused more on pop singles than album tracks, and instead of just going chronologically through the years, now we're going to talk about 1971, now we're going to talk about 1974. Instead, you divide the chapters into various categories encompassing the entire period. For example, if you want to talk about ballads, you covered the whole 5-year period as it pertained to ballads. And having each chapter stand alone that way makes it really easy to pop in and out of the book, which is what I had to do. Now, before we talk about some of the specifics in the book, let's listen to some more Brass Transit. This is your remake of a very popular and very familiar song from 1973, which you've given the Chicago horn treatment. I don't even need to say the title, because the singer is going to do it for me. It's the first thing he says. So let's check it out. From their 2014 self-titled album, here's Brass Transit.
Hello, it's me. I've thought about us for a long, long time. Well, maybe I think too much, but something's wrong. There's something here that doesn't last too long. Maybe I shouldn't think of you as mine. Seeing you, or seeing anything can't help seeing all the way through. It's important to me that you know you are free, 'cause I never wanna make you change for me. Think of me, please. You know that I'd be with you if I could. I'll come around to see you once in a while. Or if I ever need a reason to smile and spend the night, if you think I should. It's important to me that you know you are free, 'cause I never wanna make you change for me. No, not for me. Think of me, oh you know that I'd be with you if I could. I'll come around to see you once in a while. Or if I ever need a reason to smile and spend the night, if you think I should.
Well, of course, that was Hello, It's Me by Todd Rundgren, whose name came up quite a bit in my Michael Urbano and Lyle Workman episodes, as they both recorded and toured with Todd back in the 90s. You know, what I like about that arrangement is, you know, actually I never really did like on Todd's version that dun 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 kind of rhythm. So you got rid of that, but then, you know, it's like maybe a little Chicago-y at the beginning, and then like in the middle it's Chicago about half and half with Todd, and then at the end it's like all Chicago, no more Todd.
Right, yeah. I mean, the thing with Chicago, you know, part of their philosophy was that nothing was off the table arrangement-wise, which is why they ended up with so many, you know, really distinctive singles that would have 2, 3, 4 different sections sometimes, and, you know, a section that would only happen once. And when I came to the end of Hello, It's Me, and was deciding how to end it, because actually the Rundgren record is quite short, I thought, well, what would Chicago do? Forget about what Todd would do.
Yeah, right.
And that's when I thought, if you double time this, it could be one of those real, you know, Feeling Stronger Every Day style vamp outs that Chicago used to do with the horns, you know, having furious activity and fade out into the distance on that. And Actually, historical accuracy, it was written in the Starbucks at St. Mark's Place in New York City with no instrument nearby, so I was working without a net that day.
Awesome. I've forgotten about this for decades, but, what was the chocolate bar one? Was that Chicago 10?
That's 10.
Yeah, Chicago 10. I was listening to that album, and I don't remember who this lady was. She was a babysitter or a friend of somebody, but somehow we were talking about it, Chicago, and her observation of Chicago, she goes, yeah, I think they strike me as one of the bands out there that knows what they're doing. I thought about, I know exactly what she means. They can read charts, they can play tight arrangements, they're not like, half-ass bar musicians. The whole band knows what they're doing. It was an interesting phrase to sum it up.
Right, or to put, you don't want to put down other bands, but I mean, they were definitely a band that was good at more than one thing.
True, yeah.
They weren't just married to the one thing that the bunch of them could all do together. They could kind of stretch their wings. They were almost, in a way, overqualified for what they were doing when they first started out.
Darn near all of them were lead singers, and that always helps. I mean, that was the secret weapon of the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Eagles. 4 or 5 guys in the band are lead singers. I've built-in variety.
Well, yeah, my first band as a little kid was Three Dog Night, and the whole idea behind that band was they had 3 lead singers, and then shortly after that I discovered Chicago and thought, hey, they have 3 lead singers too. This is a thing that I like.
Right, and then the weirdest one was Jefferson Airplane with 1 male lead singer and 1 female lead singer.
Anything can happen.
Yeah, well, that's cool. Well, at least back then it could.